You work hard, you get paid, and for a brief moment there's relief. Then it's gone. Bills, expenses, small purchases you barely notice, they add up faster than expected. And before you know it, you're back at the same point, waiting for the next paycheck to start over. It's not that you're irresponsible, you're trying to manage what you have. You think about your spending. You make decisions carefully. But no matter how aware you are, the pattern keeps repeating. Earn, spend, reset. Earn, spend, reset. And after a while, it starts to feel frustrating because you're putting in the effort, you're showing up, you're doing what you were told would work. So why does it feel like nothing is changing? Why does progress feel so slow, almost invisible? That's the question most people never fully answer. They assume it's income, that if they just made more, everything would fall into place. But time passes, income increases for some, and the pattern stays exactly the same. Because the issue isn't just how much money comes in, it's what happens the moment it arrives. For most people, money has no clear direction. It flows toward whatever feels urgent, whatever demands attention in the moment. Bills, habits, small decisions that seem insignificant, but together they quietly drain everything. And because it happens gradually, it feels normal, familiar, expected. But normal doesn't mean it's working. There is a difference between using money and directing it, between reacting to expenses and deciding in advance where your money is meant to go. And that difference is what separates movement from progress. Because when money has no purpose, it disappears. Not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently. A little here, a little there, until what you worked for no longer feels like it's building anything. And that's where the cycle holds you, not because you're stuck, but because the system you're using is incomplete. It focuses on earning, but not on direction. And without direction, even consistent effort struggles to create change. Think about it. How often have you reached the end of a month and wondered where your money actually went? Not in a careless way, but in a way that feels unclear, like it slipped through without your full awareness. That lack of clarity is not accidental. It's the result of money moving without intention. But what if that changed? What if every dollar you earned had a purpose before it ever left your account? Not just a general idea, but a specific role, tied to something that moves you forward instead of keeping you in place. Because the moment you give your money a purpose, something shifts. You begin to see it differently. You stop treating it as something to manage and start treating it as something to direct. And that shift creates awareness. You begin to notice patterns you didn't see before. Habits that once felt automatic become visible. Decisions that once felt small begin to show their long-term impact. At first, it feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, but that discomfort is where control begins, because once you're aware, you can adjust, you can decide, you can choose differently, and those choices, repeated consistently, begin to change your position. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. Because progress is not built in one moment, it's built in patterns. And the moment your pattern changes, your outcome begins to change with it. You stop reacting to money, you start directing it. You stop wondering where it went. You start knowing where it's going. And over time, that clarity builds something powerful, control. Not the kind that depends on how much you earn, but the kind that comes from how you use what you have. That's when the cycle begins to break, because the paycheck is no longer the reset point. It becomes the starting point, a point where decisions are already made, direction is already set, and your money begins to work in alignment with where you want to go. What you're about to hear is not just about budgeting, it's about shifting how you think. Because once that shift happens, everything else begins to follow. And if you stay with it, you may begin to realize something clearly, that you were never stuck because of your income, you were stuck because your money had no direction, and that can change. There is a pattern into which many men fall, not through carelessness, but through repetition so familiar that it escapes examination. It is the pattern of receiving and releasing of earning money, holding it briefly, and then watching it depart in many small directions until little remains. This pattern does not appear harmful at first, for it allows life to continue. Yet over time, it produces a condition that binds a man to repetition without advancement. A man works, applies his effort, and receives his compensation. For a moment, there is relief, a sense that something has been gained. But this moment is short. Obligations arise, needs present themselves, and decisions are made quickly, often without full consideration. The money moves, not in a single direction, but in many. And before long, what was received has been dispersed. This process repeats itself with remarkable consistency. Each cycle appears independent, yet each resembles the last. The man does not feel reckless. He believes he is managing what he has. He thinks about his decisions, weighs his options, and acts with what seems to be care. Yet despite this awareness, the outcome remains unchanged. The difficulty lies not in effort but in structure. For most men do not direct money, they respond to it. They allow its arrival to trigger a series of reactions. Bills are paid because they demand attention. Purchases are made because they appear necessary. Small expenditures occur because they seem insignificant. Each action is justified in the moment, yet together they form a pattern that is rarely examined as a whole. There is a distinction that must be understood. Movement is not the same as progress. Money may move constantly, yet produce no increase. It may pass through a man's hands without leaving anything behind. This creates the illusion of activity while preventing accumulation. Many men confuse this movement with control. They believe that because they are aware of their spending, they are directing it. Yet awareness without predetermined intention is incomplete. It observes, but it does not guide. It reacts, but it does not shape. And without direction, money follows the path of least resistance. It goes where it is pulled, not where it is sent. There are countless examples of individuals who have increased their income, worked diligently, and maintained discipline, yet remained in the same financial position. Their effort was not lacking. Their consistency was not in question, yet their results did not reflect their input. Why? Because what they received was never given a defined role. It arrived and was used, but it was not directed. This is the condition of receiving without retention. A man becomes efficient within the cycle. He learns how to manage his obligations, how to distribute his income, and how to continue without interruption. Yet he does not move beyond the cycle, for nothing within it creates accumulation. Others observe such a man and often describe him as responsible. They see his consistency, his effort, and his reliability. Yet they also notice something else. His position does not change. He works, but he does not advance. He earns, but he does not build. This perception, though subtle, carries weight. For those who remain in motion without progress are seen as stable, but not growing. There is an affirmation that may be introduced to interrupt this pattern. I do not merely receive money, I assign it a purpose before it moves. This statement shifts the role of money entirely. It transforms it from something that is handled into something that is directed. As this idea takes hold, the individual begins to see his situation differently. He no longer focuses only on what he earns, but on what happens after he earns it. He examines the path his money takes, not as separate actions, but as a connected system. He begins to ask, where is this going? Why is it going there? And what remains when it is gone? These questions introduce clarity where there was once assumption. The man begins to recognize that his pattern is not random, it is consistent. And because it is consistent, it may be changed. Not through greater effort, but through different direction. At first, this realization may create discomfort. The individual may see clearly that much of his money has been moving without intention, that decisions were made in response rather than by design. Yet this discomfort is not a sign of failure, it is the beginning of control. For once a pattern is seen, it may be altered. The individual begins to consider assigning roles to his money before it arrives. Not after, when demands are present, but before, when thought is clear. He begins to decide in advance what portion will serve which purpose. This simple shift changes everything. Money no longer arrives without direction. It arrives with instruction, and instruction reduces. Confusion. Others begin to notice this change. They see a man who is no longer uncertain about where his money has gone. He knows. He has decided. His actions are not reactive. They are deliberate. There is a sense of order in his conduct that was not present before. This perception changes how he is regarded. He is no longer seen as someone who manages money. He is seen as someone who directs it, and there is a difference. For management maintains, direction builds. There is also a change in how the individual experiences his own finances. The uncertainty begins to diminish. The question of, where did it go, is replaced with, this is where it is going. This shift, though subtle, creates a sense of control that was previously absent. It must be understood that this transformation does not require large sums of money. It requires clarity of thought. The individual does not need more to begin directing. He needs to begin directing what he has. There may be resistance in this process. The mind is accustomed to reacting, to allowing urgency to dictate action. It may suggest that pre-decision is unnecessary, that flexibility is preferable. Yet what must be recognized is that flexibility without structure leads to repetition. Structure creates freedom. For when direction is established, the individual is no longer pulled in many directions. He moves with intention, and his money follows that movement. Over time, this begins to produce a different result. Not immediately, not dramatically, but consistently. A portion begins to remain, then more, and what once disappeared entirely begins to accumulate. This is the beginning of change, not through increased effort, but through directed flow. Thus, the first and most important realization is this: the problem is not that money comes and goes. It is that it goes without purpose. The man who understands this does not seek to hold money by force. He gives it direction, and through that direction, he begins to move from repetition to progress. There is a habit so common that it is rarely recognized as a cause, and yet it governs the financial outcome of most men more than any lack of income ever could. It is the habit of deciding too late, not in the sense of error, but in the sense of timing. A man waits until money arrives before determining what it will do, and in that delay, he surrenders control to whatever demands his attention first. What follows is not direction, but reaction. And reaction, when repeated, creates a pattern that is difficult to escape. When money is received without a decision already attached to it, it becomes vulnerable to influence. It is immediately met by obligations, expectations, and impulses that compete for its use. Bills present themselves as urgent. Desires appear reasonable. Small conveniences justify themselves as harmless, and because there is no prior instruction, each of these forces claims a portion. The man does not act without thought, yet his thinking is confined to the moment, shaped by what is immediately before him rather than by what he intended beforehand. This is the nature of financial reaction. It feels responsible because decisions are being made. It feels controlled because nothing appears careless. Yet beneath this surface lies a lack of structure. The man is not directing the flow, he is responding to it. And because each decision is made in isolation, there is no unified outcome. The result is not progress, but dispersion. Money moves in many directions, yet none of them are aligned with a single purpose. There are many who believe that awareness alone is sufficient. They track their spending, consider their choices, and attempt to remain disciplined. Yet despite this effort, they find themselves in the same condition. This is because awareness without predecision observes what is happening but does not determine what should happen. It records the movement but does not guide it. And without guidance, movement follows urgency, not intention. Consider the difference between a man who decides in advance and one who decides in the moment. The first assigns purpose before the money arrives. He determines what each portion will do, where it will go, and what it will contribute to. When the money is received, it does not require negotiation, it follows instruction. The second waits until the money is present and then begins to decide, but by that time, the pressure of immediacy has already influenced the outcome. This distinction, though subtle, is powerful. It separates those who feel in control from those who feel uncertain. It explains why some men, even with modest means, appear steady and composed, while others, despite greater income, remain unsettled. The difference is not in how much they receive, but in when they decide. There are examples of individuals who began to apply this principle with simple intention. They did not change their income, nor did they eliminate all unnecessary expense. They changed the timing of their decisions. Before receiving money, they assigned it. They determined its role, however small, and allowed that decision to guide its movement. At first, the effect was modest, but over time, the pattern shifted. What was once reactive became directed. What once disappeared without clarity began to move with purpose. Others began to notice this difference. They saw a man who no longer questioned where his money had gone. He knew. His actions reflected intention rather than response. There was a calmness in his approach, a sense that his finances were not being managed in the moment, but shaped in advance. This perception carries influence. For those who act with predetermined direction are often regarded as disciplined and capable. There is an affirmation that strengthens this approach. My money obeys decisions made in advance, not impulses in the moment. This statement reinforces the importance of timing. It shifts authority from circumstance to intention. It reminds the individual that control is established before action, not during it. As this understanding deepens, the individual begins to observe his previous pattern more clearly. He notices how often decisions were made under pressure, how frequently urgency dictated action, and how easily small choices accumulated into significant outcomes. This awareness is not discouraging, it is instructive. It reveals where change must occur, not in effort, but in order. The man who adopts predecision does not eliminate all uncertainty, nor does he remove all flexibility. He creates structure within which flexibility may exist. He allows for adjustment, but not for disorder. He directs before he responds, and through this, he reduces the influence of impulse. There may be resistance at first. The mind is accustomed to reacting, to adjusting in the moment, to believing that decisions must be made when circumstances present themselves. Yet this belief is precisely what sustains the cycle. For when decisions are delayed, control is weakened. When they are made in advance, control is strengthened. Over time, the effect becomes evident. The individual begins to feel a difference, not in the amount of money he has, but in how it behaves. There is less confusion, less uncertainty, and less sense of loss. Money no longer appears to vanish, it moves according to plan. And this creates something that was previously absent: clarity. Clarity leads to confidence. The man no longer feels as though he is chasing his own resources, attempting to understand where they have gone. He sees their path before they move. He anticipates their direction. And in doing so, he shifts from reaction to command. This is the beginning of true financial control, not the control that comes from restriction, but the control that comes from intention. The man is no longer subject to the moment he shapes it. His decisions are not driven by what appears, but by what has been determined. Thus, the absence of predecision is revealed as one of the most subtle yet powerful causes of the cycle. It is not that the man fails to think, but that he thinks too late. And in thinking too late, he allows circumstance to take precedence over direction. The man who understands this does not wait, he decides. And in deciding before action, he changes not only where his money goes, but where his life begins to move. There is a form of loss that does not announce itself, does not appear as a mistake, and does not create immediate concern. Yet over time it shapes a man's entire financial condition. It is not found in large, obvious errors, but in small, repeated movements that seem too minor to matter. These movements pass without resistance, without examination, and without awareness of their combined effect. And because they are small, they are permitted to continue. A man may believe that his financial position is determined by his larger decisions, his income, his major obligations, and his visible responsibilities. These are important, yet they are not the only forces at work. Beneath them exists a layer of smaller actions made daily, often without deliberate thought. These actions do not appear significant in isolation, yet when repeated over time, they create outcomes that cannot be ignored. This is the nature of silent drain. It is not sudden. It is not dramatic. It is gradual. Money does not disappear in large amounts at once. It fades, a little here, a little there, each movement justified in the moment, each one seemingly harmless. Yet together, they form a pattern that steadily reduces what could have been retained. The difficulty lies in perception. The mind does not easily recognize accumulation when it occurs in small increments. A single action appears insignificant. It does not create concern, and therefore it is not questioned. But repetition transforms insignificance into consequence. What was once unnoticed becomes impactful, not because it changed, but because it continued. Many men live within this pattern without realizing it. They do not feel careless. They do not believe they are losing control. They see only individual decisions, each one reasonable, each one justified. Yet they do not see the pattern those decisions create when combined. There are countless examples of individuals who, when asked about their financial condition, could account for their larger expenses with clarity, yet could not fully explain where the remainder had gone. Not because it was wasted recklessly, but because it was distributed gradually through many small actions that escaped attention. When these small movements are gathered and observed together, their effect becomes clear. What seemed minor becomes substantial. What felt harmless becomes significant. And the man begins to understand that his condition is not shaped only by what he does occasionally, but by what he does consistently. In contrast, there are those who come to recognize the importance of these smaller movements. They do not dismiss them as unworthy of attention. They understand that every action contributes, and that repetition gives weight to even the smallest decision. They begin to observe more closely, not with fear, but with awareness. Such individuals often appear different in their approach. They are not restrictive, nor are they rigid. They are attentive. They notice patterns where others see isolated events. They recognize that what is repeated will shape the outcome, and therefore they give importance to what others overlook. There is an affirmation that strengthens this awareness. Nothing is too small to shape my financial direction. This statement elevates the significance of each decision. It reminds the individual that control is not established through occasional action, but through consistent attention. As this idea takes hold, the individual begins to examine his daily behavior more carefully. He notices where money moves without thought, where habits operate without awareness, and where decisions are made out of routine rather than intention. This observation is not meant to create limitation, but to introduce clarity. He begins to see patterns where none were visible before. Actions that once felt isolated now appear connected. Choices that once seemed harmless now reveal their cumulative effect. This clarity does not overwhelm, it empowers. There is also a shift in how he evaluates his decisions. He no longer asks whether a single action is acceptable. He asks what will happen if it is repeated. This question changes everything. It brings the future into the present, allowing him to see not only the moment, but the outcome. Others begin to notice this change. They observe a man who is more aware, more deliberate, and more controlled in his conduct. He does not allow small matters to pass without consideration. He appears thoughtful, not because he is constrained, but because he understands the importance of consistency. This perception carries influence. For those who demonstrate awareness in small matters are often trusted in larger ones. They are seen as disciplined, as individuals who do not allow details to escape them. And through this perception, their position is strengthened. There is also a change in how the individual experiences his finances. The sense of uncertainty begins to diminish. He no longer feels that money disappears without explanation. He sees its path, understands its movement, and influences its direction. It must be understood that the goal is not to eliminate all small expenditures, but to bring them into awareness. The individual does not seek to remove enjoyment or convenience, but to ensure that each action aligns with his broader direction. This alignment creates balance rather than restriction. There may be moments where the old pattern attempts to return. The habit of overlooking small actions is deeply ingrained. The mind may suggest that attention is unnecessary, that such matters are too minor to affect the outcome. Yet the individual who has gained awareness recognizes this as an illusion. He understands that what is repeated becomes powerful, and therefore he chooses deliberately. Over time, the effect of this approach becomes visible. The silent drain begins to diminish. What once faded unnoticed now remains with intention. The individual's position strengthens, not through large changes, but through consistent refinement. There are examples of individuals who transform their financial condition not by increasing their income, but by gaining control over their patterns. They did not make dramatic adjustments. They made consistent ones. And through this, they changed the direction of their resources. Others often attribute such results to discipline alone, yet discipline without awareness is incomplete. It is awareness that guides discipline, that gives it direction, and that ensures its effectiveness. Thus, the silent drain is revealed not as a single mistake, but as a pattern of unnoticed movement. The man who recognizes it does not attempt to control everything at once. He begins with attention. He observes, adjusts, and refines. And through this process, he transforms what was once invisible into something he can direct. For it is not the large actions alone that shape a man's condition, but the small ones, repeated without awareness. And the moment those small actions are brought into clarity, the direction of his entire financial life begins to change. There is a belief held by many men, often without question, that the solution to their financial condition lies in earning more. It appears logical, even undeniable. If money is lacking, then more money must resolve the problem. This reasoning is simple, direct, and widely accepted. Yet it is incomplete, and when relied upon entirely, it becomes one of the most persistent causes of continued financial struggle. A man observes his situation and concludes that his income is insufficient. He works harder, seeks advancement, or finds additional sources of earnings. And when his income increases, there is a sense of progress. For a time, it appears that the problem is being solved. There is more available, more flexibility, and more opportunity to improve his condition. Yet what often follows is unexpected. The increase does not produce the change he anticipated. Instead, the pattern remains. Money still arrives and then disappears. The cycle continues, though perhaps on a larger scale. This is where the misunderstanding becomes clear. Income does not determine direction, it magnifies it. If money previously moved without purpose, more money will move in the same way, only in greater amounts. If decisions were made in reaction before, they will continue to be made in reaction now. The pattern does not change because the quantity has changed. It continues because the structure has not. There are many examples of individuals who have significantly increased their earnings, yet remain in the same financial condition. Their lifestyle expands alongside their income. Their expenses grow in proportion to their capacity. And what once felt limited now feels equally constrained despite the increase. This is not failure. It is continuation. The man has more, but he is not further. The difficulty lies in the assumption that income is the solution rather than the resource. It is seen as the answer rather than the tool through which the answer is created. And when a tool is mistaken for the result, it is used without direction. Income by itself has no purpose. It must be assigned one. Without assignment, it follows habit. It moves toward what is familiar, what is immediate, and what demands attention. It does not build unless it is directed to build. It does not remain unless it is instructed to remain. This is why many men, even as their income grows, do not experience lasting change. They continue to operate within the same pattern, only with larger numbers. The cycle becomes more comfortable, but it does not disappear. In contrast, there are those who come to understand income differently. They no longer see it as the solution to their condition, but as the means through which their condition may be changed. They recognize that what matters is not how much arrives, but how it is used once it does. Such individuals begin to separate earning from direction. They do not assume that more will solve the problem. They ensure that what they have is used with intention. There is an affirmation that supports this understanding. Income is not my solution, direction is. This statement shifts focus from acquisition to application. It reminds the individual that what is received must be guided if it is to produce result. As this idea takes hold, the individual begins to observe his financial behavior more closely. He notices that increases in income have not produced the change he expected. He recognizes that without structure, more has simply meant more movement, not more progress. This realization is not discouraging, it is clarifying, for it reveals where change must occur not in earning alone, but in how what is earned is directed. He begins to ask different questions, not how can I earn more, but what will I do with what I earn? Not how much is coming in, but what is being created from it? These questions shift his thinking from quantity to purpose. Others begin to notice this difference. They see a man who is no longer focused solely on increasing his income, but on refining his use of it.